I have a problem. These 4 honeyberry bushes are in the wrong spot. They've been here for 4 years, but now I need to do something about it. Join me today as I show you how to move shrubs and bushes. Hi, I'm Gardener Scott, and it may sound a bit unusual that I've got 4 bushes that all need to be moved at the same time. But let me give you a little background. This gazebo was part of my original garden plan that I drew up 5 years ago. But I knew it would take me a few years before I could budget it and build it in this central part of my garden. I didn't want to wait that long to put the fruit bushes in. So 4 years ago, I put in my currants and my gooseberries and the honeyberries and some aronia. I measured everything out. I anticipated exactly where the gazebo was going to go. But when I built this, it was off by a little bit. The bushes in this bed are off by about a foot. Almost 2 feet when you talk about these 2 bushes. When I put the gazebo in, I had to choose some anchor beds, the ones that I wasn't going to move, that were perfectly situated. And those were the 2 beds up front. Those have almost perfect spacing in relation to the gazebo and the plants and the border that I'm putting in place. But this bed in particular didn't turn out so perfectly. Now, whether you're moving a bush 2 feet or 20 feet, the basic process is the same. And that's what I'm going to show you today. The tools are pretty basic. I'll be using a spade to dig the hole that the bush is going into, and then I'll be using the same tool to actually dig out the bush. I'll place the bush on this tarp, and I've cut this tarp so it's easy to pull or to lift. You could use a sheet, a blanket. The idea is that you need something to transport the bush on. The root ball, if you get a large enough section of it, is going to be pretty heavy. So trying to lift the whole plant and root ball might be difficult. I prefer to just drag it on the ground to the new location. These bushes have been here for about 4 years, and I had them mulched with wood chip mulch the entire time. The first part of the process is to clear the ground where the bush is going and where it's coming from. So I took a little bit of time and I raked aside all of that wood chip mulch so I had a nice bare soil surface to work with. We're going to be doing 2 holes. The first hole, as I mentioned, is where we're going to move the plant to. Well, where we dig the plant from, that hole needs to be filled. So you have an option when you begin to dig. And I suggest use this same soil to fill that hole where the plant was. Because I'm doing this in such a close area, I'm just going to go ahead and dump the soil right next to where that hole is going to be. If you're doing this with bushes spread far apart from where they are now to where they're going, that's another use for the tarp. Go ahead and take this soil and put it on top of the tarp so that you can drag it to the location where you need that hole filled. So now I'm just gonna dig this hole to a depth and a width that I think estimates the size of the root ball that I'm going to be digging out. With the hole dug, now we can begin preparing to dig out the plant. And so I suggest digging a little bit of a trench all the way around. This will help guide our spade and determine how big a root ball we get. And then just choose a spot, try to go down. You can lift up a little bit, but we want to try to get all the way around this. A complete circle because we'd like to take all of this out as one piece. And you can see as more and more is dug, the plant is beginning to release. So now I'll come back to where I started, and I'll start going a little more horizontally. I was going down at a slight angle, but now I'll go down, lift up, and then cut towards the middle. And this may only need a couple digs, middle, and you can see that we've been able to lift this completely from the ground. Now this is a relatively small bush. The other ones will have bigger roots. But you can see that around the edges, some of the roots extend beyond where the soil was. That's okay. I suggest leaving all these roots. You don't need to trim everything off. You could try to wrap this in burlap if you need to move it a big distance. For me right now, I'm just going to slide it into the new hole. My soil is relatively sandy and it's pretty loose. So as I move this, there's a chance that the root ball can begin to break apart. That's okay as well. As long as I have good roots, I can always add soil around those roots later. And this is the kind of task that does get easier with a second person, especially for the bigger plants that are going to have a big root ball. I want to try to move everything together. So by myself, I'm going to get down underneath to the center of the plant and then just try to move the whole thing. And even though this is kind of small, it is pretty heavy. But I slid it to its new location. Now I can go ahead and backfill with some of the soil. For bigger bushes, try to get a friend, get a helper, someone that can help you lift, because you really don't want to injure yourself just because you're moving a bush. This new location, even though it's about 2 feet, makes a world of difference to me, because I'm a bit of a perfectionist when it comes to this plan that I want for this part of the garden. With all this soil right here, it's easy for me to just go ahead and begin filling in around the plant. You're likely doing this in a completely new location, but the idea is the same. We want to cover all of those roots that were exposed, compact a little bit around the new hole, because we want the soil to have good contact with those roots. We don't want any air pockets. And so we'll just fill in all the gaps, making sure that no roots are on the surface. And this bush has a new home. There are a few things to consider when deciding to move a bush. First is the timing. Now you can do this in spring, summer, fall, early spring. If the soil has begun to thaw, but the plant is still dormant, is really a pretty good time to do it. Fall is also a good time to do it. Early fall, late summer, you can have temperatures that allow you to get out. It won't stress the plant. And if you do it early enough, there's still plenty of time for the roots to establish and grow. Now it is midsummer for me. Normally this is a time of year you might not want to consider it, but it's overcast today. We've actually got a cooling trend going on. The next week has a lot of rain and a lot of overcast in the forecast. So I thought this would be a good time to go ahead and move these plants. When it gets hot, and if you do the moving at the peak of summer, you're probably going to want to do a couple things. First off, the plant's going to be stressed when you move it. So consider doing some pruning and cutting off some of the branches and leaves. Because when you cut the roots, there's not going to be enough roots to feed the whole plant. So by trimming off some of that extra growth, it helps the plant recover from some of that stress. And the other thing is to make sure you keep it watered. Keep the soil moist so that you can get that root development that's going to give you a strong and healthy plant. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and move the rest of these. With all 4 plants moved, I now have the spacing that I wanted all along. I can finish my border to edge around this bed, and my original plan will be fulfilled. Whenever you transplant, especially with big shrubs and bushes, you want to make sure that you soak the plants and the soil and the roots very well right after you transplant. Try not to delay, especially on very hot days. Give it a good drenching and then let the water settle. So I'm going to let this soak in, and then I'll come back to it in another 30 to 45 minutes and give it another second soaking. I am very happy with this bed now. These 2 bigger bushes have a little more growth ahead, and these 2 smaller bushes now have room to grow, and this whole bed will be filled with honey berries. Now, after the soil is soaked, the next step will be to replace the mulch. So I'll put the wood chip mulch back over the soil, and I'll give it another good drenching. With the rains that are forecast, I probably don't need to worry about this for a few days, but I will keep an eye on it. If I start seeing some of the tips brown, well, it tells me that the roots aren't enough to sustain the growth of this plant. So I'll do some pruning after the fact if the plant looks like it's struggling a little bit. And because it's stressful to the plant, I can expect that I might lose a year in the fruiting of these honeyberries. Anytime you're going to transplant a flowering or a fruiting shrub or bush, you can expect that in the next season, you might not have those blossoms and fruit. I was okay putting these plants in the ground 4 years ago, hoping that it was going to be right. Losing another year is okay. That's better than waiting to build a big structure like this and then put the plants in and then have to wait 4 or 5 years before I get any fruiting. The basics are the same, whether it's just a couple feet or a long distance. But if a bush or shrub is not in the location you think it should be in, go ahead and move it. It's easy, and you might be very satisfied with the results too. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.